Joining us now, David Bahnsen. And David is the author of a new book just out, Elizabeth Warren, How Her Presidency Would Destroy the Middle Class and the American Dream. This written when she was ahead. Now she's dropping like a dead rock in a spring lake. And we're going to be in Iowa for 5 days leading up to the caucus on the John Fredericks Godzilla of Truth Bus. Capitalism Creates, Socialism Takes. We're going to be following around the Bernie Sanders campaign for 5 days. To bring you all the action because we believe Sanders is going to win Iowa. So that's our projection. That's why we're going to be following his campaign in Iowa in the last 5 days. Hey, David, great to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
So, Davis, you write this book on Elizabeth Warren. I'm assuming you got the idea to expose this when she was leading in the polls ever since she tried to explain some of her policies and put financial parameters around it. She's absolutely tanked, and I don't think she's long for this world. But let's talk about some of her plans, and first of all, what inspired the book, David?
Well, you're right. When I was writing the book in the month of October, Warren was surging in the polls.
Right.
At one point, it had a 60% probability in the betting polls that she was going to win the nomination. But, you know, the idea that it was because she unpacked what her ideas were going to cost, and that's why she's fallen, I would kind of disagree with, because Bernie is the one who's been the big beneficiary of her fall, and Bernie has certainly always laid out what it's going to cost. I think what really hurt Warren was the way she tried to be back and forth about it, not give a straight answer. She got exposed for regular political speak. I made the comment yesterday. The problem with Warren is she's a socialist who says she's a capitalist. The thing that people like about Bernie, but gives him such a low ceiling, is he's a socialist who says he's a socialist.
Oh, David, I think you're spot on with that. And I think it was a doublespeak of Warren and then trying to explain Medicaid for all and say she's not going to raise taxes on the middle class, and then did a math project on it, which was completely ridiculous. Everybody said, 2 plus 2 is not 75. So the difference with Bernie is he's a socialist. He says he is. He's for Medicare for all. And he says in order to pay for it, taxes are going to have to go up a lot, but you're not going to have to pay for the care. So he's admitted taxes are going to go up on everybody. So therefore he has an authenticity factor where she simply does not.
That's right, and I think that the interesting thing going forward with the book is that Warren may very well end up at 4th place in Iowa, 4th place in New Hampshire, in which case her candidacy is dead.
Right.
She also may get 2nd place in one state and 3rd in the other, in which case her candidacy is going to go on. But regardless of what happens with Elizabeth Warren's candidacy, here's where the book I think is very important. The ideas, such as a wealth tax, such as forgiveness of all student debt, such as decimating the private equity industry in our country that has produced 4 million jobs. These ideas are not just Elizabeth Warren's ideas, and frankly, they're not even just Bernie Sanders. Some derivative of all the aforementioned extremism is shared by every member of this Democratic Party primary. So I believe that it is really fundamentally a book about ideas, and I think we on the right and we who are defenders of the American dream have to be prepared to win the argument, not just the election.
Warren has an interesting history because she started off as a Republican, right, for a long time, and she defended big companies in her law firm. She defended against consumer lawsuits and things of that nature. And, she was very favorable to Goldman Sachs, Wall Street, banker investment. What happened?
Well, one of the things I actually say in chapter 2 of the book is that unlike the common thing that you and I would normally be talking about, politicians flip-flopping for political expediency, stuff that, Hillary was rightly blasted for, I actually don't see very much indication that Warren has had changes of convenience over the years. The best I can tell, and I think this is worse, not better, is that she actually has genuinely evolved into a far more extremist and progressive state. She wrote a paper at Notre Dame that was published in Notre Dame Law Review in defense of lighter regulation in the utility sector in the 80s. And it was well-reasoned, well put together. And, of course, just as recently as 2003, her book, Two Income Trap, has some very astute observations in it. I think that sort of being in the Harvard Law faculty world and being a Cambridge professor, it becomes inevitable that as you're breathing in that air, you're more intellectually digesting this extremism that is now at the epicenter of her platform.
Well, it was certainly an interesting transformation for her to go through. If you follow her career, it's she was
never far right, though. You're right. She had corporate clients.
Yeah.
I think that she was kind of a more moderate Republican, and then became a more center-left Democrat. And it was the financial crisis that tipped her over the edge, and just some of the insanity that came out of her Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that Obama empowered her with. Really dangerous stuff.
All right. Well, it's going to be interesting to follow her. I happen to think I don't think she's going to be the nominee. I think it's going to be Bernie Sanders. So your book will still be pertinent. Basically, you just change the name, the first part of the book, to Bernie Sanders, how his presidency would destroy the middle class and the American dream. You're on the John Fredericks Show. We're with David Bahnsen, and David is the author of the new book out by Simon & Schuster, Elizabeth Warren, How Her Presidency Would Destroy the Middle Class and the American Dream. Why is Warren, I get the wealth tax. I mean, it sounds great. It's impractical. First of all, it's not a lot of money, but it's like punishing people for being successful. The whole thing's asinine. But why is she so hostile to capital formation, David?
Well, I think there's a big part of her that has to be hostile to capital formation because she is so dialed in, and so is Bernie Sanders, to the grievance ideology that says one person's gain is another person's loss. It is Marxian zero-sum fallacy,
right.
And of course it is not only immoral but economically preposterous. And it's really the major reason I wrote the book, and this is where you're right. You can just take out Warren's name, put in Sanders on this stuff. They, more than any other two in this Democratic primary, truly believe that the middle class in our country is being held down by sinister actors who are trying to hurt them, that you can't get ahead because it's somebody else's fault, that there isn't room for aspiration because an insurance company or a energy company or a bank is hurting you. And that, to me, is culturally the most dangerous thing happening. America has always had a ruggedness and an ability to overcome the various things that may get in the way. We have to get the policies right. There's room for important public conversations on these great issues. But this idea that there are wealthy people who are hurting middle class as opposed to participating in wealth-producing activity is just fallacious to the core. It has to be unpacked.
We're with David Bahnsen, author of the new book, Elizabeth Warren, How Her Presidency Would Destroy the Middle Class and the American Dream. What is the genesis, David Bahnsen? What is at the core of this new justice theme, where the Democrats have to portray certain classes as victims to everything, right? Everybody's a victim, and so now we need justice. And I don't care if it's voting justice or, sometimes I make fun of it and say I want coffee justice and beer justice, because sometimes I'll order beer and it's warm and it sucks and I'm pissed and I want justice. But what is at the core of this?
Well, you may recall that the communist movement of the 20th century failed spectacularly. And as a military totalitarian endeavor and as a global political movement, communism proved out of the Soviet Union and East Berlin and Eastern Europe to be a colossal failure, unable to deliver on its promises to the proletariat, and in fact leading to incredible amounts of corruption and bloodshed. And so in the failure of real Leninist Marxism, what has taken its place in the American left, the American academic left was always enthralled by Marxism, is a cultural Marxism. It is not as totalitarian, it is not militaristic, and yet culturally, the identity politics you've identified has its roots in the exact same ideology. It requires a victim. Marx's victim was the proletariat. In the case of the social justice Marxian leftist movement of today, the various victims are minorities, people of color, women. They have now decided to move into some of the various gender-related wars. And what this does is keep alive an ongoing tension whereby there are people constantly feeling that there is reason for grievance. So it divides us as a society by race, class, and gender, whereas what I believe is most important for a functioning and healthy and flourishing society is that we be structured around truth, beauty, and goodness. It's a fundamental divide between the right and the left, and I think it's ultimately one that we have to prevail in to preserve the American dream.
If you had to predict it now, David Bahnsen, author of the new book out, Elizabeth Warren, How Her Presidency Would Destroy the Middle Class and the American Dream, and you can get that at Amazon or your favorite bookstore. David Bahnsen, I'm predicting unabashedly Bernie Sanders is going to be the Democratic nominee. What's your prediction?
I'm predicting unabashedly that Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, and I think that the reason for that is that people have not had to yet go after Bernie and the Democratic establishment. They not only don't believe he can win, the majority of them pretty much know that there's a low ceiling for Bernie. Bernie has the highest level of energy, enthusiasm from the lowest amount of people. There's a ceiling around how many college-town, clueless, liberal millennials there are. And at the end of the day, I think the gloves will come off, and you will see people from the Obama camp, from the Clinton camp, from the other failed nominee camp go to war against Bernie before they will let him become the nominee. They rightly believe that Biden has a better chance of beating Trump than Sanders, and so I am not disagreeing that Sanders has the momentum. But again, if he wins first or second in Iowa, first or second in New Hampshire, and yet Biden is right up there as well, then they go into South Carolina where Biden's going to beat him by 40 points.
All right, so
that's my take.
Yes, so my take is that's why we're going to Iowa following the Sanders campaign. I predict he's going to win Iowa. I predicted that in 2016, and he did win Iowa, but he got cheated out of it by phony coin tosses. Remember that? I never understood why that campaign, why he just was afraid of Clinton. He never really took the gloves off.
Well, and you're seeing it now, though, aren't you? I mean,
now he's starting to get a little aggressive, yeah.
Yeah, but he has not yet said a thing about Hunter Biden. And this, to me, I don't even care if people believe it's a real issue or not. I do know if you want to win an election, you better make it a real issue. And Bernie's first line to Hillary Clinton in 2016, it was actually 15, the first debate was, "I'm tired of hearing about your damn emails." He gave a concession speech before he even gave a campaign. And that's what they're all doing right now with Biden. And it's a mistake that Cruz and Rubio and others made with Trump as well. They're sitting around attacking the third and fourth place person instead of the first place person. It's utterly insane politically.
Yeah, and the fear is, I think, with Biden is, they don't want to upset the establishment. They figure, well, if he's a nominee, if I can't attack him too hard, I can't be the number 2 guy. But Bernie's not going to be a vice presidential candidate. So after he got screwed by doing the strategy in 2015-16, I don't know why he wouldn't take the gloves off. But, look, I think he's going to win Iowa, David. And I think if he wins Iowa, he wins New Hampshire. I think it's the end of Warren. And then he's going to win Nevada. So Bernie can win the first 3 contests. I don't know where Biden fits in here. Then Biden's got to go, and if he doesn't win South Carolina big, he's done. So he wins there. Now we go to Super Tuesday. Then we go to Florida. Who knows? Then you go to Super Tuesday. You got Bloomberg in there taking votes from Biden. I think it's going to be interesting, man.
Well, I agree. It's going to be interesting, and I also think it's wide open. I'm doing the same thing you're doing, is looking at current facts and making assessments around them. I think that the problem that is hard for both you and I is looking at the facts that will be the case in a week, 3 weeks, 5 weeks. It's a moving target.
Yeah, so you never know.
Warren getting out of the race gives Bernie almost a layup, but I don't think Warren will get out of the race.
Well, she has to. If she finishes, not with
$25 million. If she doesn't want to get out, she doesn't have to.
Yeah, but you're not viable. I mean, if you finish fourth in Iowa,
Bernie stayed in for 8 weeks after he lost viability in 2016. These people, that's the thing. They're so narcissistic.
Well,
they're having so much fun with all this that they can stay in if they want to stay in.
Well, you're right though. If she gets out, that's going to be definitely a layup for Bernie. But David, the most fascinating scenario, if you're in Milwaukee and Bernie walks into that convention with a majority of delegates, but not enough to win the nomination. And let's say, and of course we always talk about brokered convention, it never happens. But let's just say that happens. If Bernie goes in there in first place but not enough, what people forget is once you get to the second ballot, guess what comes back into play, David?
Superdelegates.
Superdelegates reemerge, the adults in charge of the room. So superdelegates emerge. So on your first ballot, you're from Nevada. Your one vote equaled one vote. Your second ballot from Nevada, your one vote equals a half a vote because some superdelegate got a vote and a half. So then they give it to Biden and they screw Bernie again. That's the dream scenario for Republicans.
Any scenario like that, any scenario with a backdoor route for Bloomberg, any scenario, frankly, where they don't have a convention where they don't have a nominee going into the Milwaukee convention, pretty much start planning the Trump inauguration, because this is going to require a unity and an enthusiasm to win. And I do believe the Democrats have a chance of winning. I'm not one of those Republicans who says the economy is so strong Trump can't lose. I think we live in incredibly uncertain times, and anything, the margins are all so tight in the key states. I think anything can happen. But yeah, you're right. If they do a second ballot broker convention, regardless of who comes out on top, you will not have the momentum you need to defeat Donald Trump.
David Bahnsen, he's also the author of Elizabeth Warren, How Her Presidency Would Destroy the Middle Class and the American Dream. But basically, you can take her name out and put Bernie Sanders in, you got the same thing. David, thanks for being with us, man.